Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, share your insights in the comments, and subscribe to keep up with our newest narratives. At 65, I never thought I would encounter a situation like this. Life, it seems, was meant to follow a certain script by this point. Days begin with nurturing my garden, followed by tranquil afternoons immersed in books, and evenings shared with my husband, Mark, as we reflect on the memories we've created together. Yet, on one particular evening, a clandestine dialogue transformed everything, prompting me to reevaluate my understanding of the world. The tale began at a corporate gala organized by Mark's company. He had devoted more than 30 years to that place, ascending the hierarchy with steadfast commitment. Richard Caldwell, his boss, exuded a sense of quiet authority, a figure with whom I had only shared polite pleasantries at past events. In his mid-60s, he stood tall and distinguished, exuding a quiet confidence that appeared entirely effortless. The gala took place at a luxurious hotel in downtown Chicago, where grand chandeliers illuminated the elegantly attired guests with a soft, inviting light. The atmosphere buzzed with lively chatter, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the soothing strains of a jazz band playing softly in the corner. Though I wasn't especially keen on these gatherings, finding solace in the familiar embrace of home, Mark's insistence led me to don a simple navy blue dress and join him. At first glance, everything appeared to be perfectly ordinary. Mark found himself engrossed in conversations with his colleagues, while I engaged in light-hearted exchanges with the other spouses. Everything changed when Richard came up to me. "Evelyn, could I steal a moment of your time?" he inquired, his rich voice resonating above the clamor of the room. I paused. A moment? What could Mark's superior possibly want with me? Yet I offered a polite smile and nodded, trailing behind him as he guided me through a side corridor, distancing us from the main ballroom. The atmosphere was more serene in this space, the echoes of the gala retreating into the distance. He led me to an intimate lounge, a snug space adorned with soft lighting, a crackling fireplace, and plush leather armchairs. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet yet unmistakable tension. My heart raced slightly as I settled into the chair opposite him. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial," he said, giving a slight, almost anxious smile. "Not at all," I reassured him, even though I couldn't quell the curiosity stirring within me. "What's on your mind?" He sighed, rubbing his hands together, as if he were sifting through thoughts. Finally, he found the words. "It's about Mark." At that moment, I straightened in my chair, my stomach tightening. "Is something wrong?" He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Not exactly. Yet, there's a truth I believe you ought to hear." The gravity of his words hung in the air, palpable even before they escaped his lips. His expression held a weight that made me uneasy, a subtle fervor that sent my heart racing. "Evelyn," he continued, his voice a blend of softness and authority. "I've known Mark for a long time. I have observed him cultivate his professional journey, uplift his peers, and nurture his family. Amidst everything, I've observed a particular detail." I took a deep breath. "What is it exactly?" He leaned in a bit, his eyes fixed intently on me. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The words struck me like a heavy stone in my chest. My breath hitched, and a surge of defensiveness welled up inside me. I don't understand," I stammered. "Mark is a good husband. He's always been." Richard nodded. "I know he is. But do enlighten me, Evelyn. When was the last moment he genuinely perceived you? Not merely as his wife, but as the extraordinary woman you are." I parted my lips to reply, yet silence enveloped me. He pressed on, his tone gentler this time. "I've noticed the way your gaze lingers on him when he's preoccupied. I've seen you linger in the shadows at gatherings like this, as he immerses himself in his tasks. You invest so much, but does he reciprocate?" A knot tightened in my throat. I yearned to argue, to assert that he was mistaken, yet a part of me hesitated. "I don't intend to overstep," Richard remarked, leaning back a bit. "But sometimes someone on the outside perceives what those within cannot." I breathed out gently, my thoughts swirling. Richard examined my expression, then gave a subtle, understanding smile. "Evelyn, you deserve to be seen." The words resonated deeply, awakening a part of me I hadn't known was there. For the first time in ages, uncertainty washed over me, leaving me unsure of my emotions. I remained there, immobilized. Richard's words lingered in my thoughts, awakening feelings I wasn't prepared to face. "You deserve to be seen." Had I truly remained invisible for so long? I wanted to dismiss his words as just an observation, a kind but misguided gesture. Yet, beneath the surface, a part of me recognized the truth in his statement. Mark was a good man, a diligent provider. He had always been consistent, dependable. Yet in those quiet moments, the ones that held significance, when had he last truly seen me? When had he last acknowledged the subtle ways I endeavored to keep our life vibrant and rich? The way I folded his shirts just as he preferred. The manner in which I adorned our home with his cherished belongings. The way I remained steadfast beside him during each professional victory, allowing myself to take a step back. I cleared my throat, suppressing the knot that had formed within me. "Richard." He raised a hand, halting my words. "I don't intend to put you in an awkward position, Evelyn." However, I felt compelled to speak up. I exhaled slowly, acknowledging your candor with gratitude. I finally spoke, my voice softer than I had meant it to be. "Mark and I have shared decades together. A union is about more than mere visibility. It revolves around dedication and consistency." Richard acknowledged with a nod. "I understand, and I respect that." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and intense. "But have you ever considered what you genuinely desire?" The question hung in the air, palpable and thought-provoking. What I desired. I had devoted countless years to considering Mark's needs, the demands of our marriage, and the expectations placed upon me. I had never genuinely paused to reflect on my own desires. I released a soft, anxious chuckle. "Richard, this is certainly an intriguing discussion for a corporate gala." That brought a smile to his face. "I suppose it is. Yet something urged me to voice it." A moment of silence lingered between us, punctuated solely by the gentle crackling of the fireplace. He let out a sigh as he rose to his feet. "I should let you get back," he said. I stood as well, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed my dress. "Indeed, Mark will be curious about my whereabouts." Richard acknowledged this with a nod, yet his expression held an enigmatic quality. "Evelyn made me promise one thing, though." I tilted my head, curiosity piqued. "What's that?" "Don't brush off my words. Reflect on it." I paused for a moment, then nodded deliberately. "Very well." He offered me a faint smile before moving aside, indicating the door with a gesture. As I strolled by him, I sensed the warmth of his presence lingering near me, the heaviness of our earlier discussion still resting on my heart. The gala buzzed with energy when I returned. Mark remained exactly where I had left him, engrossed in dialogue with his colleagues. At first, he was oblivious to my presence. I lingered at a distance, observing him intently. His expressions were lively, and his hands danced through the air as he communicated. It was a facet of him I had always cherished, his fervor, his ambition. Yet I recalled Richard's words. Had Mark ever regarded me in that manner? When he finally turned his gaze and noticed me standing there, he offered a brief nod before returning to his discussion. A change stirred within me. Richard had sown a seed, and despite my efforts to dismiss it, I sensed it was already taking root. The journey home was silent. Mark sat beside me, his hands tightly clutching the wheel, his eyes locked on the shadowy path ahead. The city lights flashed by in a haze, yet my thoughts wandered far from the present. Richard's words reverberated in my mind, his voice lingering in a way that refused to fade. "You deserve recognition." I caught a glimpse of Mark. He appeared weary, a subtle line of tension etched between his brows. Nearly 40 years of marriage had allowed me to memorize every detail of his face. The sharp lines of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled with laughter, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. Yet when was the last time he truly looked at me? He cleared his throat, shattering the silence. "Did you enjoy yourself this evening?" The inquiry took me by surprise. It was a question he posed after every occasion, every assembly, every meal shared, almost as if it were a duty rather than a sincere interest. I paused before responding. It was intriguing. He nodded absent-mindedly. "Fine, fine," and just like that, the dialogue concluded. I shifted my focus back to the window, observing the city fade into the distance as we headed toward the serene suburbs. Upon arriving home, Mark followed his usual routine. He removed his jacket, placed his keys on the counter, and disappeared into his office for a final glance at his emails. I lingered in the kitchen for a while, gazing at the vacant spot he had just occupied. I didn't feel anger towards him. Not really. Mark had always been like this, committed to his craft, consistent in his habits. He had provided me with a comfortable existence, a stable existence. Yet, Richard's words had stirred something within me, something I couldn't suppress any longer. I made my way to the bedroom and glimpsed my reflection in the mirror. At 62, my once auburn hair now bore streaks of silver. Delicate lines etched my face, serving as reminders of the years I had experienced. Yet my eyes remained unchanged. Within them, I discovered something I hadn't recognized in ages, a profound sense of loneliness. I had always thought this was simply a facet of getting older, this subtle retreat into the shadows, this slow descent into the mundane. Yet now, for the first time, I questioned if that was truly the case. The following morning, as Mark departed for work, he pressed a kiss to my cheek and remarked, "I'll be home late. A significant client meeting looms ahead." I nodded, a subtle smile gracing my lips. "Very well. Stay safe." And just like that, he disappeared. I lingered in the doorway for a while before retreating back inside. Typically, my days are consumed by errands, housework, or tending to the garden. Yet today, an unusual restlessness took hold of me. Before I could rationalize my way out of it, I found myself grabbing my phone and dialing a number I never imagined I would. Richard picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn?" There was a subtle hint of surprise in his voice. I inhaled slowly. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" There was a pause. And then softly, of course, an hour later, I found myself sitting across from him at a serene cafe by the lake. The aroma of roasted coffee beans mingled with the scent of fresh pastries. Outside, the autumn leaves twirled gracefully in the breeze. Richard regarded me with a gentle, inquisitive gaze. "I found myself uncertain about whether I would receive a message from you." As I stirred my coffee, I observed the delicate swirls of cream merging with the deep, dark liquid. The thought of making a call lingered in my mind, but I hesitated. He nodded, anticipation in his eyes. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Your words have lingered in my mind." His expression was a mystery. I paused for a moment before locking eyes with him. "You were correct." There was a spark in his gaze, an elusive quality that I couldn't define. "Evelyn, I'm not expressing any remorse about my life," I interjected softly. "Mark and I have created something enduring, something genuine. Yet, at some point, it seems I lost the ability to desire anything for my own sake." Richard leaned in a bit, and now I found myself struggling to breathe. A stillness enveloped us, punctuated solely by the faint murmur of voices in the background. At last, Richard broke the quiet, his tone soft. "I simply wish for your happiness." I gazed at him, truly gazed at him. He was a man with no obligation to involve himself in my life, no reason to utter the words he had, other than the fact that he had perceived something within me that I had yet to recognize. In that moment, clarity washed over me, and I understood that a decision lay before me. I found myself gazing at Richard from across the quaint cafe table, my fingers encircling the comforting warmth of my coffee cup. "All I desire is for your happiness." His words lingered in the atmosphere, weighty yet soft, reminiscent of a truth I had long evaded. For years, I convinced myself that contentment sufficed, that security, stability, and loyalty formed the foundation of a fulfilling life. And indeed, they did. Yet Richard had revealed something within me, something I hadn't realized was absent. a longing to truly feel. I inhaled deeply, the heaviness of my reflections bearing down on me. Richard, I'm at a loss with all of this. His gaze softened. You don't need to do anything, Evelyn. Consider what brings you joy. When did you last engage in something solely for your own sake? I began to speak but hesitated. When was that moment? I had devoted years to making sure Mark was upheld, that his ambitions, his aspirations, his universe stayed whole. I had crafted a life steeped in order and routine. Yet what about my own identity? I took a sip of my coffee, the rich, bitter warmth anchoring me for a fleeting moment. I find myself questioning who I am beyond the confines of my marriage. I found myself surprised by my own words. Richard offered me a small, knowing smile. Perhaps it's time to discover the truth. I released a soft, anxious chuckle. That seems quite daunting. Perhaps. Yet, there was an undeniable thrill in it, wouldn't you agree? I remained silent. I was unable to respond. For within me, I recognized the truth in his words. We lingered in quietude for a time. The outside world continued its relentless motion. Vehicles glided by, laughter echoed, and the breeze stirred the golden leaves of autumn. Life rushed on, but perhaps it was time for a moment of contemplation. At last, I placed my cup aside and locked eyes with him. Uncertainty looms ahead. Richard. Yet, I realize it's time for me to embrace life once more. A smile danced at the edge of his lips. That was my sole intention, for you to understand. When Mark returned that night, I was already at the kitchen table, waiting. He hardly glanced in my direction as he placed his briefcase down and loosened his tie. It had been a long day, he murmured. I'm utterly drained. I observed him for a moment. This man with whom I had crafted a life. This man I had cherished for decades. As he navigated through the house, an unspoken gap lingered between us. A divide that had silently expanded over time. I inhaled deeply. Mark, can we have a conversation? He hesitated, finally meeting my gaze. About what? I swallowed hard. About us? His brows knitted together in confusion. What about us? I paused, then finally spoke the words that had been swelling within me since last night. I feel invisible, Mark. He blinked. What? I feel as though I've dedicated years to being the wife who supports you, who keeps everything in our life running smoothly, ensuring that it all remains steady. And I do love you. Yet, at some point, I faded from view. He frowned, clearly taken aback. Evelyn, what's the source of this? I shook my head. It has lingered for ages. I simply never allowed myself to voice it. He settled into the chair opposite me, his hand gliding over his face in a thoughtful gesture. I had no idea you felt this way. I observed him intently. Have you ever pondered? He remained quiet. In that instant, I understood something heart-wrenching. Mark wasn't an unkind husband. He wasn't intentionally unkind or inattentive. He had merely believed, as I did, that marriage equated to routine. That familiarity was sufficient. We no longer felt the need to reach out to one another as we used to. Yet that wasn't truly living. That wasn't love. Not anymore. What are you saying? He finally inquired, his tone careful. I take a deep breath. I must begin prioritizing my own life once more. His expression dimmed a bit. Are you revealing my secrets? I paused, then simply shook my head. The future is uncertain, Mark. However, I realize that I cannot continue in this way. If we wish for our marriage to endure, a transformation is necessary. He gazed at me intently. For the first time in years, I noticed a spark in his eyes. Understanding. Perhaps there was an opportunity to mend this. Perhaps there wasn't. Yet, for the first time in many years, I felt prepared to discover the truth.